Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review for the month of October. We are continuing on the Halloween horror movie reviews, and we're on season 1, episode 35. This series kind of went on a little longer than I expected, but hey, that's okay. I'm probably, I got one more movie after this, and I might review another, but then after that, I'm done. I'm probably gonna end it with one video after this. Now, I might do another movie review after it, but then after that, I'm all done. But anyways, yeah. Today's movie, as you can tell by the title of today's video, this review is filmed in black and white yet again because we're talking about, that's right, another Universal classic monster movie. And that, of course, is The Invisible Man from 1933, directed by James Whale. So, what is the plot to The Invisible Man? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. A stranger emerges out of a freezing February day with a request for lodging in a cozy inn. The villagers, aroused by his trepidation and curiosity, bring it upon themselves to find the answers for, because there are questions they have, who is this person, and why is he disguised in such a manner with bandages wrapped all over his face and stuff like that, and goggles, etc. The villagers find the answers, and what they discover is not only a man trapped in the terror of his own creation, but a chilling reflection of the unsolvable mysteries of their own soul. So that's basically the plot synopsis to the 1933 movie The Invisible Man. Now, this is based on a book by H.G. Wells, who is one of the most well-known science fiction book authors. In fact, I own a couple of his books. In fact, I own the original book, The Invisible Man, from 1897, published by H.G. Wells. Pretty good book. But the book author himself, H.G. Wells, of course, he is most well known for the book War of the Worlds from 1898. The book War of the Worlds from 1898, which this book has had 3 movie adaptations and it's had a couple movie adaptations, 2 theatrical movies and then some direct-to-video movies, but of course this is his most well-known book. But anyways, back to the review. So anyways, how was this movie received? Well, when The Invisible Man was released on November 9th of 1933 in the U.S., it received positive reviews from critics and audiences and was a big hit at the box office. And, and to this day, The Invisible Man from 1933 is considered a great movie, and many people would say it is the best Universal classic monster movie, and I really cannot disagree with that. I really like this movie. Now, I do own this movie on Blu-ray. I own it on Blu-ray in this 7 Universal Monster movie collection, which this collection comes with, of course, the original Invisible Man, the original Wolfman from the 1940s, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, Dracula, all that good stuff. So, you can't go wrong with that. But then, of course, because of how successful this movie was, this movie had a couple of sequels. You had The Invisible Man Returns in 1940, you had The Invisible Woman the same year, you had Invisible Agents, you had Invisible Man's Revenge, and of course, Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. And then, of course, in the year 2020, there was a new movie adaptation of this book in 2020, directed by Leigh Whannell, who Leigh Whannell is the guy who, he did not direct the movie, but Leigh Whannell served as a writer. He wrote the first Saw movie, and he also wrote the first 2 Insidious movies. And he took over the director's chair for the Invisible Man remake from 2020, which I really like that movie. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into my review of this movie. So, the movie starts off where it's snowing outside, and we see a mysterious man who's wrapped up in all bandages, and he basically has these goggles on and a trench coat and a hat, and he basically walks inside this bar. And which is basically a house. And I gotta say, I really like this house because basically this is a house that not only is it a bar, but it's also a motel that, people can stay at, which is cool. But but our main character of the movie, Jack Griffin, aka the Invisible Man, who's played by Claude Rains, comes out from the cold, and the villagers are curious, like, who is this guy, like, why is he disguised that way and stuff like that. But the owner of the bar and the motel agrees. She decides that, hey, it's okay that Jack Griffin, she's okay with him staying in a hotel night for a few days and stuff like that, because the Invisible Man, aka the main character Jack Griffin, the reason he's even at this hotel in the first place is because he needs a place of quiet and secrecy so he can work on his experiment, because he himself is invisible and he is basically trying to get an antidote. That way he can turn back to a normal person, which is a rather interesting idea for a movie. And you got to keep in mind, like I said, this is based on a book too, and the book was published in the year 1897. I mean, the ideas for this were very ahead of their time. And I will say, of the movie adaptations based on H.G. Wells' work we have had, now I do like the original War of the Worlds movie from the 1950s. It's not a great movie, but I do like it for what it is. But this right here is definitely the much better movie, and I would say that this is the best H.G. Wells film adaptation in my opinion. But I also do really like the 1960 movie adaptation, The Time Machine, starring Rod Taylor, which I know they did a remake of that movie in 2002 with Guy Pearce, but I've never seen the remake, but I do really like the original movie. But anyways, let's get back to the review. So the next morning, the Invisible Man, aka Jack Griffin, who is played by Claude Rains, is basically doing an experiment in his room, and basically the person who owns the bar and the whole house that lets people check into the motel and stuff like that, she goes up to the Invisible Man's room and she basically asks him, hey, are you gonna come out? It's 1 o'clock. That's when everyone eats. And then, she pushes open the door and Mr. Griffin says, leave me alone, but he violently pushes the door, and he violently pushes the door and makes her fall down the stairs and stuff like that, and it makes her drop her tray. So she basically tells the other people, hey, we got to get him out of the place. And she basically says to one of the bartenders, one of the people who works at the bar, he has to be out of this place in 30 minutes or I'm getting the cops to remove him and stuff like that. And again, I really liked, one thing I really liked about this movie is the practical effects. This movie came out in 1933, and now while, yes, there have been better special effects in some movies I've seen, for a movie that came out in 1933, the special effects in this movie are phenomenal for a movie that came out all the way back in the 1930s. And this movie does cut by at a really good pace. The movie's only like an hour and 8 minutes, so it does cut by at a good pace. But then anyways, we are introduced to a girl in the movie by the name of Gloria, who her dad, has a friend named Dr. Kemp. And Dr. Kemp even tells Gloria that, her dad is not a very good person. He only did, this bad science stuff, etc. But Gloria does play a part of the movie, which we'll get to. But anyways, the police tried to remove the Invisible Man, aka Jack Griffin, from the motel, but of course, it doesn't go well. And then, of course, this is probably the most iconic scene of the movie, and there will be spoilers for those who haven't seen the movie, but oh well. I mean, this movie's, spoiler alert for a movie that's 92 years old, but there's the well-known iconic scene where the Invisible Man says, all right, you fools, you brought this on yourself. You want to know who I am so badly? Well, I'll show you who I am. And then the Invisible Man, he takes off his goggles, you know, a nose piece, and then he basically unwraps the bandages on his face, and everyone freaks out when they see he's invisible, and then everyone runs out of the place and he's laughing maniacally, which, I'll be honest, this is a sci-fi horror movie, but it also has some comedy elements to it. Like, now, honestly, you could debate if this is a horror movie, but I kind of view it, me personally, I kind of view it just more as like a sci-fi movie with some horror elements. That's just me personally, but this movie also does have some comedy. This movie does have a very serious tone throughout most of the movie, but it also does have some comedic moments, like for instance, like I said, I really like the whole scene where the Invisible Man says, "I'll show you who I am," and then he takes the bandages off his face and he throws them at the guards, and then they run out the room. Like, I thought that scene was funny. And then later on in the movie, the Invisible Man, aka Jack Griffin, played by Claude Rains, he basically he's now going on a rampage in town, basically, and, you know, and there's a whole part where Dr. Kemp is in his office, and he hears the radio on that, about a news report of an Invisible Man, and then the Invisible Man turns off the radio, and Jack Griffin says they'll all get what they deserve and stuff like that, and he basically wants Dr. Kemp to help him get back to normal and stuff like that, and not only does everyone freak out about the Invisible Man, but heck, even one of the police officers, the main one who tried to remove Jack Griffin from the apartment, he even manages to call the police chief, but the police chief doesn't believe him and stuff like that. But later on in the movie, he finds out that, you know, hey, everyone was telling the truth. But and one thing I will say I do really like about this movie, Gloria is the love interest of the main character, Jack Griffin, aka the Invisible Man, and I thought that the acting was, for a movie that came out in the 1930s, the acting in this movie was spectacular, and you definitely buy, and one thing I think works really well about this movie, you definitely buy the romantic chemistry between Gloria and Jack Griffin. Like, it's very believable, but I think a part of that is due to the great performances by the cast and stuff like that. And then, of course, like I said, Jack Griffin, he goes up to the doctor guy who, like I said, basically, you know, Dr. Kemp, and he basically wants Dr. Kemp to help him get back to being a person, you know, an antidote and stuff like that, and, you know, at first, you know, everything's going all fine and dandy, and the Invisible Man starts talking to Dr. Kemp in one scene, and he basically tells him that the whole reason he went to the motel in the first place was so he could have a place in private secrecy to work. That way he can get an antidote to get himself back to normal, but the Invisible Man says, of course these people couldn't leave me alone, so I had to do this rampage and stuff like that. And of course, Dr. Kemp thinks the guy's insane, but he goes along with it because he knows that this guy's a lot stronger than him. And another thing I really like about this movie, as a fan of the book that came out in 1897, this movie does follow the book story rather well. Like, this movie is pretty spot on to the book. Like, that is why, in my opinion, this is easily the best H.G. Wells film adaptation. Now, like I said, you know, I do really like the movie The Time Machine, specifically the one from the 1960s starring Rod Taylor. But even then, that movie does make some small changes from the book by H.G. Wells, but I still like that movie. But after watching this again, I would still have to say that this movie right here is easily the best H.G. Wells film adaptation. Just because this was a lightning in a bottle film that was definitely way ahead of its time. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where Jack Griffin, aka the Invisible Man, you know, basically Dr. Kemp is driving his car, but the Invisible Man is able to trick him, and he's able to get out of the car in time, but, like, he causes Dr. Kemp to accidentally drive his car over the cliff, and, like, explodes, but like keep in mind this movie was made in the 1930s, so it's not like a super violent movie, but it like there's no blood in the movie or anything, but because at the time, movies didn't really have ratings until later, but it is what it is, but I still do rather like this movie. And then, of course, there's the whole finale where a person basically tells the police chief that he saw the main character, Jack Griffin, go into the barn and stuff like that. And basically the police chief says the guy might have hallucinated or something like that, but we can't take that chance. So the movie ends where basically all the police squad basically line up to defeat the Invisible Man. And again, this movie does have some comedic bits I like, like for example, I love the part when the Invisible Man is outside, but he's just like screwing with the police officers and doing the dumbest things, but like in a funny way where he's like pulling on their shirts and stuff like that. Again, I thought that was actually funny with the way it was executed. But then near the end of the movie, the police officers have the barn surrounded. They're able to, torch up the place, and then the Invisible Man comes walking out, but the Invisible Man has all of his clothes off, to stay invisible, but, the footprints show, and then, so, yeah, and then the movie ends and then another part I really like about the movie, I also really like the scene close to the end of the movie where you basically have a train on, a track, but, basically part of the hill with the track is destroyed, so that the train goes off. Now, granted, you can tell it's a toy train, because keep in mind, this movie was made in the 30s and technology was limited, but I think for what they had at the time, it works really well. And then the movie ends where Gloria is in the hospital to see her love interest, but then the movie ends where his face goes back to normal, which I'm not really the biggest fan of that ending where he's invisible, but then, he turns visible by the end. I kind of felt like the ending was, yes, it does wrap up the story of the movie, but I also kind of do feel like, in a way, it was a cheap way to, set up a sequel, which is funny because it took them 7 years to make a sequel to this movie, which I'll cover the sequel someday, but Halloween is almost here, so I won't have time to review the sequels, but I will review the Invisible Man 2020 remake directed by Leigh Whannell, starring Elizabeth Moss. I will be reviewing that movie next, because if I reviewed the original, why not review the remake? And, at the end of the day, The Invisible Man from 1933 is a really good, sci-fi horror thriller film with excellent performances and a really good story. So yeah, at the end of the day, I would highly recommend this movie, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give The Invisible Man 1933 a 9 out of 10, and I would say you should definitely add this to your Blu-ray or DVD collection. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review of The Invisible Man from 1933, and we'll catch you guys for the next review of The Invisible Man 2020, and who knows, if I get time, I might review the first, not the sequels, but I might review the first Insidious movie next. We'll see, after I review the Invisible Man remake, but we'll see. And also, another thing I forgot to mention, in the year 2000, now, granted, the Invisible Man movies, specifically this movie, the 5 sequels to this movie, and the remake from 2020 starring Elizabeth Moss, those movies were all distributed by Universal. But Sony Pictures Entertainment made the movie Hollow Man from the 2000s, starring Kevin Bacon, which is basically an unofficial it's not a remake of The Invisible Man, but it's an original movie that's kind of like a take on the Invisible Man, but it's not a remake, it's its own movie. But I do like that movie. But yeah, anyways, guys, this review's gone on long enough. I gotta get ready for work. I gotta go to bed, brush my teeth, all that good stuff. So, yeah. we will talk to you guys real soon, and I hope you enjoyed this review, and be safe, and yeah, we'll see you guys real soon. Later now.